Greetings to all of our YouTube subscribers and friends. Welcome to episode number 96 of If This Car Could Talk. We're so glad you joined us today, and this week's feature car is a special one indeed. Since July 4th, we've been featuring all of the outstanding red, white, and blue AMC muscle cars from the Dan Curtis collection. If you missed the last two episodes, you really need to see them both. Dan's cars are all top-notch restorations and highlight AMC's supercars of the classic muscle car era. Today, Dan will explain the story of the Javelin's involvement in Trans Am racing events. In 1970, these cars won the championship, so to commemorate this accomplishment, AMC built and sold exactly 100 replica Trans Am Javelins, and Dan's car is among these special edition cars. So sit back and enjoy today's feature, and be sure to give the video the thumbs up and share it with everyone you know. Without any further delay, here's Dan to give you the scoop on this freshly restored pony car from American Motors. Now, let's go for a ride.
Hi, this is Dan Curtis, and I am the owner of multiple red, white, and blue American Motors muscle cars. And today we're going to be talking about a 1970 Trans Am Javelin, one of 100 Trans Am Javelins, all made exactly the same. And there's known of less than 50 left. So this is a pretty cool car. I hope you enjoy the video. A friend of mine had suffered some illnesses, and he had an unrestored, actually a pretty rough, red, white, and blue Trans Am Javelin, which was the other 1970 red, white, and blue car that American Motors sold. And so he had some difficulty using a standard transmission, which all Trans Am Javelins have. And as a result, he was interested in a car way up in Massachusetts that was an automatic 1971 Javelin AMX. And so we made a deal where I would buy the car in Massachusetts for him, and I have family there, so I drove my truck and trailer across the country, hauled one car out to somebody in New Jersey, then drove up to Massachusetts, picked up that car, and then drove the car all the way across the country to Kenosha, Wisconsin. Traded and gave this guy a couple of extra bucks as part of the deal. Traded that car to him for the Trans Am Javelin, and then drove the Trans Am Javelin all the way back from Kenosha, Wisconsin on the back of my trailer to Phoenix. The Trans Am Javelin came from the factory with a 3.91 rear gear ratio. And so on a 4-speed car, I would liken first gear to almost similar to the old granny gears that they had in pickup trucks in the old days. You don't get that much speed out of it, but boy, because of that 3.91 rear end, that thing just leaps when you hit it in first gear. So the interesting aspect of this Trans Am Javelin is that although it had some rear quarter body work on it, it was pretty much an original paint car forward of the rear quarters. And the reason they were able to do that is because with a 3-color car, you could fix some rust behind the rear wheels and just repaint that area, and you didn't have to worry about matching the other paint colors, because you could just keep it below the body line of the wheel, behind the rear wheel. But this car, when we went through it, as you'll notice in the engine bay, it's not as shiny in there as the exterior of the car, and that's because that's the original paint in the engine bay. And when we redid this car, rather than strip the inside of it down to bare metal, we purposely left it as is, and we didn't strip the underside down to bare metal either. So the underside paint on this car and the paint inside behind the door panels and under the carpet is all original paint, as is inside the engine bay, and I plan to leave it that way. We will be rebuilding this engine sometime in the not too distant future. As you can see, it's got the old worn off original American Motors blue paint, and although it runs good, I will, like we do on every car we restore, we'll go through the engine and make it basically brand new again. And of course, I can't resist adding that extra 100 horsepower that we do when we rebuild those engines. So that'll make this car just rip your head off with an additional. Right now, it was supposed to have 325 horsepower with the performance add-ons, basically a Group 19 performance upgrade, which is carburation, intake manifold, exhaust headers, and ignition. It's around 360 to 370 horsepower, and when we go through it, we'll have it up over 425 horsepower, which is a lot of horsepower in any car, especially one that weighs 3,250 pounds. And when we got the car, I could tell that there was some body work that had been done on it. And when we started cutting back the paint, we realized there was 3 layers of metal in the lower rear quarters of that car. The original metal, which had rotted, and then they repaired it once and put metal on top of it rather than cut the original metal off. And then that must have rotted, and so they put metal on top of that one, and so there were 3 layers of metal on it. So we took that off, and we got new repair panels, original stamping, made from original stampings, and we put the correct metal back on it, and now the car looks exactly the way it came from American Motors. You'll notice in the pictures in the video that the car has some spoked rims on it, and the reason I have put those rims on it in the larger tires is because that's how those cars were raced. And so those are a replica of the wheels that the cars were raced by the Penske team, and in particular Mark Donahue was the driver, a very famous and very accomplished racing driver, switched to American Motors, I believe in the late 60s or in 1970. And so they made 100 of these Trans Am Javelins as a commemorative model for the racing that they had done with the Penske team. And so out of that 100, there's less than 50 of them known to exist. So this is probably out of all the red, white, and blue cars I have, except for the Superstock AMX, which is not a road-capable car. It was purpose-built as a race car. That's probably the most rare I have out of all my American Motors. And so that's a pretty interesting car. It's a pleasure to drive. I have one thing left to do to it before I'm finished with it, and that is they had large 3-inch exhaust pipes coming out directly from headers in front of the back tire. Well, I'm going to not run directly from headers because it'll give you a headache in 15 minutes driving it. But I found some mufflers that have the inlet and the outlet on the same side, which they're basically made for the AAR CUDAs. And I'm going to put those mufflers on it, and I'll have the same tailpipes coming out in front of the rear tires as they did when they raced them. So the Javelin is also a rear leaf spring car, but it does lack the torque links that the AMXs have. And so they have a longer wheelbase than the AMX, so they have a really nice ride. And that the quarter panel window, which opens on the Javelin and does not open on the AMX because the body is 12 inches shorter, it really helps to make the inside of the car much less noisy from wind, and you don't get that buffeting of the wind up against the rear windshield because you've got the air can escape out the rear windows. And so they're like any rear leaf spring car. There's a little bit of jounciness to the back end of the car, but it handles like it's on rails. I took a half a coil out of the front spring, on the front springs on the car to drop the front end down a little bit, and then I had new heavy-duty rear leaf springs made, and they were actually too heavy-duty. So it had the back of the car up too high, so I put some lowering blocks on it. And as you can see in the photos, in the video as it goes by, it's got a fantastic stance. And that car, that's basically sitting the way they were when they were raced by the Penske team. Now in 1970, American Motors was challenged by the Trans Am Racing Series officials that they didn't make sufficient number of Javelins in the model that they were racing to be homologated. So at first they made these 100 Trans Am Javelins in the end of September and into October 1969, but because the Trans Am racing folks were challenging them, in part because they were starting to beat the crap out of all the other competitors, they had to build 2,500 additional special model Javelins, and that was called the Donahue Javelin. And that car could be gotten in any color you wanted. And it had, rather than have the adjustable rear wing spoiler that's on this Trans Am Javelin, which was unique only to the 100 of those Trans Am Javelins, they had what they call a ducktail spoiler on the Mark Donahue Javelin, and they had the similar front spoiler. And so there are 2 versions of specialty Javelins for 1970. The Mark Donahue Javelin, which we have one at my shop that we're restoring, and then this Trans Am Javelin.
Thanks, Dan, for generously sharing your car and your encyclopedic knowledge of all things American Motors with our YouTube family today. This is an incredible car, and should get a lot of thumbs up from our viewers. We'll bet we get a lot of compliments from all you guys out there as well. As always, thanks for tuning in and for your support. We appreciate it. Next Thursday, join us for our final edition of the Curtis AMC collection when we spotlight a phenomenal 1970 Rebel machine. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, please be careful out there.